The great failed romances of the 20th century. Someone's gotta show you how they went down. The great failed romances of the 20th century. You can learn the truth if you just stick around.
Welcome to the Great Failed Romances of the 20th Century. I'm singer, songwriter, and historian Teddy Gray.
And I'm a beautiful little fool, Sam Kaufman. So, old sport, which doomed couple will we be diving into today?
Well, based on the fact that you said old sport, it sounds like you already know.
Oh, so I guess I just better not say it then, huh? Stupid me, right?
Relax, old sport.
Hey, I thought that was gonna be my thing!
Today we'll be looking into the relationship between a literary genius and his muse. It's F. Scott Fitzgerald and Zelda Sayre.
Francis Scott Key Fitzgerald was born to a lower-middle-class family in 1896. With his family struggling financially throughout most of his life, Scott quickly became aware of the class differences between those with money and those without. From a young age, it's reported that Scott developed an obsession with wanting to make his way to the top and become one of the beautiful people. The way he planned to do so was through writing.
Now, in this day and age, choosing to be a writer in order to achieve fame and fortune would be about as wise as using a cheese grater as your hairbrush. But at the time, Americans had not yet discovered that they hated reading, and Scott began writing prolifically throughout high school, his brief stint at Princeton, and his time in the Army.
It was while Scott was dispatched to Camp Sheridan in Montgomery, Alabama, when he first met the love of his life, Zelda Sayre. The 18-year-old daughter of a judge, Zelda was part of a rich family, and Scott fell in love with her almost immediately, declaring her his golden girl. After Scott was restationed to Long Island, the two began writing letters to one another, and Zelda's letters only made him fall deeper in love.
After leaving the Army, Scott began to pursue a career in newspapers, and then advertising, but with little luck. To make matters worse, his initial marriage proposal to Zelda was rejected. There were numerous things standing in his way, Scott being a Catholic, the parents not approving of the relationship, but most importantly, Scott was poor as dirt. And as Zelda told him, which Daisy would later tell Gatsby, if you want to be my lover, you've got to get with my Bens. Benjamin Franklin's, that is.
Actually, what she said was that poor boys don't marry rich girls. This set a precedent for Scott, using Zelda not only as an inspiration for his work, but often also directly ripping off her quotes and diary entries.
At least someone's being appreciated for their writing. None of the jokes I submitted for this script made it in.
Sam, they were horrifically anti-Semitic.
Hey, they were also homophobic. Relax, I'm a gay Jew, so it all just counts as self-deprecation.
But you wrote them for me to say.
Yes, and then I was going to file a lawsuit against you for creating an unsafe work environment and sue you for millions of dollars. That's called strategy, baby. If Zelda had any brains, she would have done it to Scott.
Heartbroken by Zelda's rejection, Scott poured himself into his work, convinced that if he was able to sell a novel to publishers, Zelda would have to marry him.
The novel, based on Scott's college years, and entitled This Side of Paradise, was accepted by Scribner's in 1919. Immediately after Scott received the acceptance letter, he showed it to Zelda, and a week after the book was published in 1920, the two were married.
Scott's debut novel was an immediate success and ushered in the Jazz Age, or as it's commonly referred to, the Roaring Twenties. An age of financial prosperity and relaxed morals, Scott and Zelda became instant celebrities and the perfect poster couple for an age that Scott would so thoroughly document. As they drank themselves silly, partied long into the night, and behaved promiscuously, it seemed as though nothing could go wrong for these two beautiful people.
This, of course, meant it was the perfect time for something to go wrong. As Scott worked on his second book, Zelda gave birth to the couple's first child, and soon after, another one followed. But the couple was more concerned with being the life of the party than enriching the lives of their offspring. Scott and Zelda became just as famous for their drunken antics as they were for their work, and were frequently thrown out of hotels for doing things such as jumping into fountains. This is the era from which the Scott and Zelda myth as we know it today was born. But, as all drunks know, you can't stay giddy forever. Soon enough, the hangover hits.
Privately, the couple had begun to fight, and Zelda was prone to periods of depression. The family's financial situation was beginning to worsen as well. By 1924, the two were burned out and depressed, and left New York for Paris. The getaway designed to save their marriage unfortunately put more strain on it than ever. This was largely due to Zelda having an affair with a young French pilot. After a few weeks of this, she even asked Scott for a divorce, but he refused. Soon after, the pilot left the country and would never see Zelda again, but the damage to their marriage couldn't be undone.
It was at this point that Scott began work on his defining novel, The Great Gatsby. Pouring his emotions into the novel, it had become clear to Scott that the bubble had burst and something had broken in their marriage which could never be repaired. Soon after, in the same year, Zelda overdosed on sleeping pills. She quickly recovered, but it was clear that her mental health was deteriorating quickly.
To make matters worse, Scott's popularity was dwindling as well. While The Great Gatsby is now considered a classic, when it first was released in 1925, it was largely ignored and sold poorly. This contributed to Scott's depression and signaled to the author that perhaps the end of an era was nearing.
Not to mention that Zelda would frequently tease Scott about the size of his penis and imply that their marriage wasn't working because he was secretly a fairy. Don't worry though, Scott proved his masculinity by having sex with a prostitute shortly after.
So as you can see, very healthy couple here.
In 1929, Zelda was diagnosed as a schizophrenic and admitted to a sanatorium in France. For the remainder of her life, Zelda's health worsened, and she spent time in and out of mental hospitals. Scott paid for her treatment, but after publishing one more unsuccessful novel, he moved to Hollywood in hopes of having a successful career as a screenwriter. The two briefly reunited during a trip to Cuba, but by that point, they were spending far more time apart than together. Scott quickly returned to Hollywood. This would be the last time the couple ever saw each other.
Finding little success as a screenwriter and descending further into lifelong alcoholism, Scott was more discouraged than he had ever been. In 1940, at the age of 44, he suffered a heart attack and died. His funeral was sparsely attended, and Zelda, who was stuck in the mental hospital, was unable to be there.
Years later, in 1948, Zelda was living in Highland Hospital and awaiting shock treatment. After a fire broke out in the hospital kitchen, the building soon went up in flames, and 9 women were killed, Zelda among them. And so the once legendary marriage between Scott and Zelda became nothing more than that, a legend.
Sheesh! Talk about a feel-good story, Teddy. Jesus Christ.
I don't write history, I just sing it.
So, Teddy, is this song going to be as bone-crushingly depressing as the story behind it?
Fortunately, no. I chose to take a more optimistic view of Scott and Zelda's relationship.
Oh yeah? How so? This I'd like to hear.
Scott and Zelda spent their entire lives chasing headlines and cultivating their own myths. It's clear that they wanted to be seen as an all-time great couple, lovers for the ages. And despite the devastating lows of their marriage, it's safe to say that they achieved that. While their marriage may have ended tragically, history has remembered Scott and Zelda as the beloved enfants terribles of the Roaring Twenties. Their relationship is still more synonymous with glamour and decadence than it is with despair. They may have lived long enough to see their love spiral out of control, but they are still crystallized in the mind of millions as stars of the jazz age and the epitome of young, drunken love. One can't help but think that they'd be happy about that.
Wait a minute! That wasn't about the song at all! You tricked me!
That's where you're wrong, old sport. Because that's exactly what this song, entitled This Side of Paradise, is all about. The disconnect between myths and reality, and how you should never let the truth get in the way of a good story. So this song goes over the facts of Scott and Zelda's relationship, sure, but more importantly, it discusses the legend that it inspired. I think that's just the way they'd want it to be.
Wow, this F. Scott Fitzgerald sounds like quite a guy. Sure makes me wish I could read.
Sit back and enjoy This Side of Paradise.
I give you all the green light to listen.
It's 1919 and the story goes, after months of debts and frustration, a poor boy chased after a rich girl with the news of his publication. Said this is our ticket to higher class, for the fame that we've long been craving. This book is the key to our destiny, let's begin the misbehaving. It's called This Side of Paradise, this side of paradise. Let's make our lives paradise as husband and as wife. We'll be the next great socialite, stars of the jazz age overnight. She said sounds like paradise, he hugged her far too tight. The idol of youth and the flapper, New York's top party goers, spent 2 years of drinking, traded for 2 decades of hangovers. A nice quiet life would have never felt right, but the spotlight was overbearing. Along came affairs and declining sales, and the novelty no good, and Scott departs for Hollywood. Depression, its new books obscured. The dream feels like a sham. From there on, her new home was Highland Hospital, till all that remained were embers. When they died, seemed there was nothing to feel good about. At least I think they liked the way that they've been remembered. They took their share of paradise, and for it paid a costly price, following the faint green light until it fades away. Love's like the pursuit of fame. You hunt it down until you're drained. It may drive you to your grave, we'll chase it anyway. And now their loves recalled as paradise, being etched into the sands of time. Scott and Zelda won the fight despite losing their lives. This time's got a way of rewriting truth, something that the Fitzgeralds love to do. Myths overpower what's real and true, and the dream is crystallized till it's paradise. The great failed romance is the 20th century. Someone's gotta show you how they went down. The great failed romance is the 20th century. You can learn the truth if you just stick around.